Well, these are exciting times in Ireland at the moment. That was a Chinese curse. May you live in exciting times. And it's very easy for people who are a bit more stable and a bit more secure to be smug and to be laughing at what's going on. The reality is that these are very, very frightening times for some people. And there's a lot more uncertainty now than there has been really since 1922. One of the things that I've been observing is the amount of people who do not have security either in their jobs and their incomes or in where they're living. So there's an increasing amount of people, young men in their 30s, I've encountered, who are couch surfing, who are going from home to home, who do not have any stability either in the short term or, more alarmingly, in the long term, about where they're going to have a roof over their head. This is not going away. Certainly Fine Gael have no commitment to providing genuinely affordable housing to Irish people. And there is a perception, whether it's right or wrong, that refugees or people who are claiming refugee status in this country get housed much more quickly and get state benefits much more quickly than Irish citizens who are living here. Whether that's true or not, it's a perception that those in power haven't done enough to dispel. It's also an alarming seedling of genuine racism. The Irish are not a racist people, but they're being provoked horrendously in the past year, 2020, with race baiting in the Irish Times, race baiting on RTE, the continuous promotion of a woman who objectively seems to be not very intelligent, and that's the kindest I can say, Ebon Joseph. It's hard to see anything in RTE or the Irish Times that doesn't somehow include an ex cathedra audience being given to this woman. Nobody in RTE, nobody in the Irish Times questions her. This is not a racist country. The people who you meet when you go around Ireland are not racist. But they are being provoked and they are being gaslit and they are being insulted left, right and centre. Does that mean that they will suddenly end up becoming racist? It's unlikely, but it means that they're getting angrier and angrier and angrier. So recently, there has been an absolutely ridiculous ad run by RTE. And you must remember that RTE, Radio Televís Sheridan, is the state broadcaster of the Republic of Ireland. That means that they're working on taxes, on direct government subsidy, which, in my opinion, is automatically questionable because that is a fairly blatant instance of the government buying the compliancy of the largest broadcaster in Ireland, and also, of course, the licence fee. And this particular ad, it had a video online, and it also had some very expensive inserts in the Sunday papers of last week, the 11th of October. And it was headed and signed off by a John Williams. John Williams is the head of news and current affairs in RTE. And essentially, this ridiculous advertisement was of no benefit to anybody who it might affect. So in other words, all of us out here, all of us, all us bad people, us bad boys and rebels out here on the, what I describe as the alternative conservative scene, it's not going to in any way affect us, except from, a comedic point of view, notwithstanding the fact that that's our taxes. But notwithstanding that, then who is it supposed to influence? Is it supposed to influence that amorphous middle ground who, are watching RTE and who read the Irish Times? Because one of the things that a growing number of people is saying, I see them myself when I have coffee in Howth during the weekdays. You ask them, do you know anyone who's died of this? And I haven't met one person who has. So John Williams had this ad basically saying, you can trust us in RTE. And the fact that he even had this ad up shows that we on the alternative conservative scene have won. We have won. The rest of it now, that doesn't mean that we need to become complacent out here. But all of us big bad people on the far right, or as the Irish Times call us, the far right, are people like myself who are on the dole in my instance, sitting at home talking into a microphone. And then we put things on YouTube. No, we're the far right. We're the big threat to the state. We're the ones who are going to undermine everything. Well, if we'd known it was going to be this easy to pierce the matrix, we would have done it years beforehand. It was like pushing an open door at this rate. But what very, very foolish people like John Williams have done is they have legitimised all of us out here, and they have had a knock-on effect of legitimising anti-maskers. Now, the efforts by primarily the Irish Times, the disgraceful articles in the Irish Times that conveniently, by omission, associate anti-maskers with racists and people who are opposed to freedom of choice for women and people who, in many instances, would quite legitimately want to take this country back to the 1950s. That hasn't worked, but it has had the opposite effect. It's the Streisand effect. What you resist persists. Recently, I was at a supermarket nearby me. In the first week of the mask scam in August of this year, I got harassed by 2 customers on 2 separate occasions. Since then, nobody has given me any lip. And I think that is partly because it coincided then with the 81 golfers in the Station House Hotel in Clifton and Galway, and people realised, even subliminally, or they may still be in denial about it, consciously if not subconsciously, people realised that this was a scam. And they realised then that those of us who stood our ground, really in my case since February of this year, but in the latest episode of this ridiculous epic, when I refused to wear a mask and when I wrote to the Gardaí explaining why I was refusing to wear a mask and stating a solicitor who would represent me if I was arrested, they're realising that we have the upper hand and that they were made a fool of and we weren't. It is very significant that nobody has bothered me after the first week of the mask scam in August. Not once. And I go shopping for my parents and myself on an almost daily basis. I've spoken to smaller shopkeepers and smaller cafe owners in Howth, and they said, quite frankly, they have a deliberate policy of not challenging anybody who doesn't wear a mask. Fair play, I said, you will be getting my custom and I will recommend you to others. I'm not going to name them just so as not to embarrass them, but if anybody meets me in person, I will tell you those shops and cafes in Howth that have that policy, because I would strongly recommend them. They're smaller shops, they're smaller cafes, they're independent, they deserve good custom. I will name them if people ask me in person, but I just won't embarrass them on social media now. So we stood our ground, those of us like myself who refused to wear a mask. And I mean, I would call myself a conscientious objector. I say that seriously, I say that earnestly in relation to wearing a mask. But recently I was at the supermarket about 10 days ago, and I was chatting with a friend, and blah 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 blah, and I said, as an anti-masker, and a woman interrupted me. She said, if you're an anti-masker, I need you to stand away from me. No, I said. She said, could you not be a bit more considerate? No, I said, this is a public area. I said, you can move me if you want to. I said, let's see you put your hands on me and move me. Oh, but she said, you need to think of others. Do I? I said, really? I said, tell me about the others I need to think of. I said, or rather, just stop wasting my time with this nonsense. Now, I said, if you want to distance from me, you want to do social distancing, and if you want to wear a mask or all the rest of it, that's not my problem. You can stand as far away from me as you like. She said, you should just be a bit more polite. Oh, I said, now I'm getting a lecture in good manners from a woman who's not my mother. Well, oh, she said, you're all the same, aren't you? Listen, I said to her, I'm ending this conversation. I said, you can talk to the wall if you want to. I said, you're probably well used to it. So what that did bring home to me was, though, that this woman, who was about as normy, she looked like she'd been incubated in a test tube in the vegan corner of the RTE canteen. This woman, who, in my opinion, you could preserve her in formaldehyde for students as example of normie, example of Sutton normie, kind of middle class, nice normie. This woman was used to the concept and phrase of an anti-masker. That's very significant, particularly coming from a normie drone like that, because it shows that we have developed a legitimate identity. Whether I'm sure that woman, or John Williams in RTE would not have. That would be far too big a concept for those ones. But it does show that we have drilled our way into the consciousness of the masses. They know who we are. This happened in the Great War. The Great War was the first instance of the concept of the conscientious objector. And that was partly because the Great War had conscription. in Britain. It didn't have it in Ireland, although we were part of the UK at the time, and indeed the efforts to bring in conscription in Ireland caused all hell to break loose. It could happen again here. It could happen again. John Williams in RTE says, "We do not take our position for granted," said a man who takes his position for granted. Don't take people for granted. It's a nice Chinese expression. The most placid tiger has the sharpest claws. But anyway, back to the Great War and conscription. People who dodged the draft were pilloried and vilified in the first instance. These days they're reflected upon retrospectively as heroes. They were the conscientious objectors. We are the conscientious objectors this time. It's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. Okay, the circumstances are different, but the principle is identical. The principle is identical. Because we were the ones, as I said, in my case, I called bullshit on coronavirus back in February. But we were the ones who, when all the media hype started in August about compulsory masks and mandatory masks and all this thing, we were the ones who just said no. I was the one who wrote to the Garda Commissioner for Dublin and said, I'm going to jail on this one. But what I would advise people who are anti-maskers to do is to do what I have done. Never get insulting with people who challenge you. Well, rather, I'll qualify that. Shop workers doing their job or Gardaí doing their job. Never, never, never get smart or facetious or condescending with them, because they are only doing their job. Members of the public who are busybodies and who come up to lecture me, particularly tapping me on the shoulder, in my opinion, are 100% fair game. But I draw the differentiation. I differentiate between those wankers and members of shop staff who have a job to do and who may be under an awful lot of stress and pressure. Because don't forget that people working in shops are putting up with all this crap and the masks and all of this. It's not easy for them. They're on maybe a minimum wage, maybe 10, 11 euros an hour, 12 euros an hour. They're not paid a fortune to work in a supermarket or work in a corner shop or that kind of thing. They do not deserve, under any circumstances, to be abused. But particularly considering the stress that they're under at the moment with all this shite. So if somebody, and it happened to me in the first week of coronavirus, a duty manager said, I require you to wear a mask. Well, I said, that's not going to happen. He said, it's the government that's doing it. Well, I said, have you read the law? Well, he said, I've read enough of it. No, I said, go back and read it all. I said, and then look at exemptions, and the exemptions that I'm claiming for extreme distress and difficulty breathing. He said, are you claiming those exemptions? Yes, I said. Oh, well, he said, that's it then, isn't it? Yes, I said, thanks. And that was the end of it. And I see him in the shops again, and I've never gloated at him. I've never tried to rub it in, because that's not the way you do it. That duty manager's paid maybe 13 an hour, 14 an hour. His job is stressful enough. He was obviously under considerable stress the day that he challenged me. It was the first day of the mask ban. It was the first day of the mask ban. So the man was under a lot of pressure. So you have to forgive people. You have to forgive people. You can't be gloating at people. I've seen him in the shops again. He's helped me numerous times since that encounter. Nothing's been mentioned. He hasn't tried it again. So deal done, as far as I'm concerned. You know, he's paid peanuts to do a very stressful job, and he's working in Sutton, and they're all wankers anyway, so that's even worse. There should be, it's an occupational hazard to work with Sutton people. Jesus. I don't quote my address as Sutton. I wouldn't condescend to quote my address as Sutton, for Christ's sake. The ones in the golf club and the tennis club and all that. Orla, I love your mask. Oh, yes. Oh yes, yeah, it's got hearts in it. I got it in BT. It's got hearts in it. You know, all these fucking nappies covered in germs from these people. Ugh. Thomas Sheridan, who, I have to say this in all seriousness, if I was to pick one person in my adult life, of anybody else, one person who has had the biggest influence on me, it has to be Thomas Sheridan. because Thomas Sheridan totally focused my outlook on psychopathology, collective psychopathology, individual psychopathology, abusive language, what he refers to as the language of bureaucracy, which he refers to, I think, as a profanity. That's not the exact word that he used. He's profane. He describes it as profane and debased language of bureaucracy. Now we're hearing Varadkar. And I hate hearing him with his Bert from Sesame Street voice. But now we're hearing Varadkar talk about a circuit breaker lockdown, and circuit breaker lockdown. And this is the abusive language that psychopaths use. But Thomas Sheridan recently recommended watching a film called The Mist. There is a TV series called The Mist on Netflix. The fact that it's a TV series on Netflix tells me enough. But I think it may have been broadly inspired, very broadly, from a film from 2007 based on a novella by Stephen King. I give films, when I watch them, marks out of 10. I would give The Mist 9.5 out of 10. It is one of the most profound, but also one of the most shocking and horrific films that I have ever seen. I will not spoil the plot here, but I will give one slight insight here. And if you want to watch the film without me wrecking it, switch off now. So I won't give the plot spoiler here, because I do intend to do a separate video on The Mist, because it's such a very, very profound film. But stop listening now if you don't want to hear anything about it. The film is set in a village in Maine in which a mist descends and a group of people are trapped in a supermarket. It then emerges that the mist contains something which I don't need to say here, which is far more sinister and serious than people imagined. There is a lot of speculation, and I would speculate personally about what brought that down or why it happened. But there was one character in The Mist called Mrs Carmody. Mrs Carmody, I don't have the name of the actress here present, I'll do it in my next video, or in another video. Mrs Carmody was sneered at by the local community and seen as a god botherer, and seen as kind of a Bible basher. They were so busy being condescending to her that they didn't realise that she was right. In one particular scene, Mrs Carmody is confronted by the threat, shall we say. She's confronted directly, and she's a woman who preaches, the end of the days, the end of time is nigh, and we are sinful people, which, I think there's a lot to that. She's confronted by the threat. And the reason why the threat doesn't attack her and leaves her alone isn't to do with religion or even the occult. It's a lot simpler. It's simply because genuinely she's not afraid. Thomas drew that as a metaphor of not so much the coronavirus itself, but all of the hysteria and scamdemic around the coronavirus. Those like myself who are genuinely not afraid, because I've dealt with the police before, I've dealt with the chief state solicitor before, I've dealt with all of these people before. I am not afraid of them. But when you are not afraid, then neither are you abusive or discourteous, which gets back to what I said earlier. Mrs Carmody is not afraid, but ultimately she ends up being killed. And the people in the group did not have the insight or the imagination or the occultic grasp to realise that at least in the short term, that is, while they're trapped with the mist in the supermarket, that Mrs Carmody was the one that they should get behind. Sometimes, in the short or medium term, these wacko people come into their own. Circumstances change. Sometimes they change very acutely and radically. They did. Everybody was trapped in a supermarket with a mist that seemed to have something lethal in it. If Mrs Carmody is fearless, and, as was seen in the film, is not going to be attacked by the mist, then she's got something that they need to get behind. And after everybody gets out of the supermarket and the mist clears, then you can tell her to fuck off. Then you can say, you can go back to being a fucking Bible basher and doing what you do, selling fucking glass ornaments and all the rest of it. But they did not see in the story that Mrs Carmody's fearlessness was her big gift. And it's us, those fearless ones here out in the, the terrible alt-right. Oh gosh, somebody said something on the internet. We're the ones who've been setting the agenda, because nobody in the alternative scene in Britain, even Northern Ireland, Britain or Northern Ireland, North America, Canada, the US, particularly that hellhole New Zealand. Oh God, no. No. No, no, no. They should build a wall around New Zealand and not let them escape for what they've done. Nobody in any of the English-speaking countries other than Ireland has excelled in piercing the matrix of the mainstream media to the extent that the Irish alternative conservative movement has. We've done it. We're setting the agenda. They're listening to us. If we have these articles in the Irish Times and these expensive taxpayer-funded ads on RTE and in newspapers, that means that they are responding to us. They are acknowledging us. And we, the alternative conservatives, I only started this in August when the judge in the High Court insisted I get a desktop mic and a webcam. I wasn't even on the scene until August. But the much bigger fish like Thomas and Rowan Croft, Gemma O'Doherty, John Waters, Dave Cullen, those independent commentators who've been out there working their asses off, screaming in the wind for years. We are the Mrs Carmodys. We're not afraid. Gemma O'Doherty, for all as misconceived as so much of her stuff is, Gemma's not afraid. Neither is John Waters. They'll stand up to the guards, and in many instances their behaviour is extremely inappropriate. Gemma's tirade that she released in a hapless Garda sergeant on the Keys back in April, it's shameful what she did. But Mrs Carmody behaved badly as well. Mrs Carmody was not a nice woman. Mrs Carmody was a crank. But what she has in common with Gemma and John Waters and all of these ones is that she's not afraid. And that's the secret. When you stop living in fear, then you realise, and this was a central moral of the Mist, that these things are really just an illusion.